Hi, I'm David from IA Coach. Inductive Automation have just released the Ignition 8.3 beta, and with that comes a significant amount of changes. One of the things that I've been looking forward to the most is the way that Git can now interact with Ignition. Inductive Automation have actually spent a lot of time re-engineering the back end of the gateway to allow us to use tools like Git, and I just wanted to make a quick video of what that actually means, what has changed and what that looks like for us using a tool such as Git. So let's have a look. So to start, I'm running Ignition in Docker. I have a Docker Compose file here with two services defined. I've got an Ignition 8.1 and an Ignition 8.3 instance. And I'm running those not from the direct image from Docker Hub. I'm adding an additional script over this to install Git into these Docker images. So we have Git installed locally within these containers. All right, so I've got Visual Studio Code open here and I've got it connected into my Ignition container. The folder that's opened is actually the data folder within the Ignition directory. And I have Git installed already, but I do not have Git initialized. So the first thing I'm going to do is initialize Git. So what we can do is type git init, and this is initialized a Git repository in this folder. The next thing we want to do is start tracking all of our files. So we can say git add dot. Dot just implies everything. Now that all the files are being tracked, we're going to commit all the files with git commit. We'll give it a message of initial commit. Committing is essentially taking a snapshot. So we're taking a version and locking it in time. And then from that version, we'll be able to see what changes have been made. So we're just taking a snapshot of the base directory here. So this is in 8.1 specifically at the moment. So we're going to make some changes to 8.1 and 8.3 and see what the differences between the two are. So I'm going to go into my Ignition 8.3 Visual Studio as well and do this exact same process. All right, so now we're in Visual Studio Code again, but this time connected to the Ignition 8.3 container. So I'm going to run that same process, git init, git add everything. Now that's complete, we'll run git commit, and we'll give it the same sort of message, initial commit. All right, so now both of our 8.1 and our 8.3 have git initialized with an initial snapshot taken, an initial commit taken. So let's go make some changes and see how these changes are presented to us when we're using a tool like Git. So the first thing I'm going to do is jump into 8.1. All right, so I've jumped into the 8.1 designer, and what I'm going to do is just create a tag. I'm going to create a standard memory tag, my new tag. We can change it to a float and hit go. So now I'm going to add the exact same tag in my 8.3 gateway. My new tag, and we made it a float. So back into Visual Studio connected to our 8.1 gateway, I'm going to click on Source Control tab, and we can see all the files that have changed since our last commit. The one that we care about the most is this config.idb. This is the file that holds our tag configuration. The problem is here though that we can't access this using Git. It's not a standard text form. It has binary data in it which can't be represented in a standard text encoding, in which case Git struggles to find the difference between two versions. It's unable to process it, and so therefore we can't really use Git as a tool to do this. There is a workflow defined at the moment in the Ignition user manual, which involves setting up a server-side script to export all your tags and then store those into the gateways folder. And that's sort of like a workaround. just so that we can see the tag changes, but it's not a bidirectional thing, right? We can't make changes to that file and have them automatically uploaded. So this was the problem with 8.1. The reliance on these IDB files to hold our configuration meant that we can't interrogate them with tools like Git. And so in 8.3, a big change was actually to remove a lot of these IDB files, or remove the reliance on these IDB files in place for standard text files that can be interrogated by Git. All right, so let's have a look at what this change looks like in our 8.3's gateway. All right, so back in Visual Studio Code connected to our Ignition 8.3 gateway, I'm going to click on our source control tab again. And you can see that there's different files in this list now. This tags.json is the one that we care about. And you can see that it's got our tag that we generated in standard text form, and we can read exactly what it is. My new tag, which was of a float4 type. Very clear. This resources.json file just basically tells us that this tags.json file was created and should be used within this directory. It's pretty clear here that we can see our tag configuration as raw text. So the next thing that I'm going to do is actually make a modification to this tag. But before I do that, I'm going to commit these changes into my repository. So I'm going to run another git command. I'm going to run git add dot. So we're going to stage all of those pending changes. Then I'm going to run git commit. And I'll give it a message of add tag. All right, and you can see there's no changes now in our source control. If I open this little graph down the bottom, you can see our initial commit here, and then our add tag commit. So let's go make one more change to this tag and see what that looks like in our source control. So let's jump back into our Ignition Designer, and I'm going to make a change to this tag one more time. I'm going to change it to a double type. And I'm going to see what effect that has in our source control. All right, so we're back inside the Visual Studio Code connected to 8.3's gateway. And I'm going to go back into my source control tab and then have a look inside this tags.json file. And you can see instantly and very clearly what change was made. The data type was changed from float4 to a float8, which is the equivalent of a double. So this is why the changes that inductive automation have made to the Ignition backend make Git a viable solution. So this wasn't visible in 8.1. This change was hidden within the black box of the IDB files. And so tools like Git weren't able to interrogate those files and bring these changes up for us. So this is great to identify tag changes, but another thing that is really critical to identify are changes to our Ignition gateway configuration. And so the removal of these IDB files, the reliance on these IDB files in favor for the JSON files is not just for tags, it's for our gateway configuration as well. So let's go make a change to our gateway configuration and see what that looks like. All right, so I'm back inside my 8.3 gateway, and I'm going to just make a small change to one of my database connections. I'm going to set its active connection count to 50, and I'll hit save, and we'll go see what this looks like in our source control. So if we open up our source control again in Visual Studio Code and have a look in our config.json, you can see that exact change has been reflected. It's highlighted with red and green to show that it was 8 and it is now 50. So we have a record of every change from what it was to what it now is. And so I can commit these changes, I can add them and commit them, and then we'll have a record of this configuration change over the history of our project. During my time as the Technical Support and Training Manager at Inductive Automation Australia, I saw many tickets come into the support team. A common theme would involve a gateway that was running correctly, an unknown event happens, and now it has a degraded performance. So the obvious question is, well, what changed on that gateway? And unfortunately, that question isn't easy to answer. At least it wasn't in 8.1. Gateway changes weren't easily identified with tools like GIT, and so we relied either on a manually written record, or on the event log and searching through the event log for changes. The other thing that we would often do, and would be the way that we resolve these often, would be to just restore an old backup. Take 2 backups and restore them and look through them line by line until we find the issue, which is not an efficient process, and it isn't an easy way to get to a resolution. So now with tools like GIT, the ability for it to just automatically present these changes to us means that it's going to be a lot easier to identify problems, a lot faster to a resolution, and will give us more certainty about the changes that have happened between versions. So hopefully you're as excited about these changes as I am. And if you're not already using GIT in your standard workflow, I highly suggest that this is the time to learn the tool and start implementing it within your Ignition projects as a standard practice. Thanks for watching.